Hello and welcome to the MPTS Connect Sports Production Panel. My name's Jake Bickerton. I'm the editor of Broadcast Sport website and magazine and events. And I've got with me Chris Evans, who is the head of Pro Video at FutureSource. We'll be joined by two other panelists a little later on from Move and Sky Production Services to talk through tech innovations in sport over the last year and how tech sort of helped bring production and broadcast of sporting events, enable it to carry on during lockdown and to actually innovate as well during that time as well. And there's lots of good stuff to talk about coming up. But Chris is going to set the scene to start off with, talking about sports tech developments. Sort of, I suppose there's going to be a focus on remote cameras, system cameras as well. And in the last year, a real move towards kind of cloud-based working and those kind of remote workflows that have kind of inevitably been accelerated through what we've had to put up with over the last year in terms of the kind of working conditions. Hi, Chris.
Hi, Jake. How you doing?
Yeah, not too bad. How are you? Okay.
Yep, all good here. As you can see, the sun's coming in through the window, so I've actually got a bit of a Blade Runner effect through the blinds.
It looks good, yeah, it looks nice. I wasn't sure if it was kind of sort of virtual. No, that's cool, man. Right, I'm gonna stop waffling, turn my camera and mic off for a little bit, and I'll see you in about 10 minutes to join the panel discussion.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Jake.
Okay.
Yeah. So I'm going to start with the what's been the catchphrase of 2020 of I'm just going to share my screen, and hopefully you can now see the beginning of the presentation. So also I want to offer an apology to anyone that's tuned in hoping for a keynote from Chris Evans, the actor, or Chris Evans, the radio DJ. I'm actually a market analyst, as Jake mentioned, at a company called FutureSource Consulting. And we are a global research and consultancy agency that is based in the UK, but with a global remit. And what we can bring to this kind of conversation is the fact that we look at a number of different technology markets across a range of different verticals, but often, and ultimately kind of the video supply chain. So we're not looking at technologies in isolation. We work with a number of different vendors and users throughout all of these spaces. You can see from the kind of media content delivery to the consumer electronics that are used to consume the content that is being produced. So what this gives us is a kind of a unique perspective of the market and the industry as it develops, and we look at technology. So when we are looking at how technology is being adopted, especially within the context of sports broadcasting, we're able to look not just at the technologies at the point of acquisition, the technologies as they're being used in production, but also factor that into distribution and consumption. And obviously, the past 11 months, I think, since the pandemic, certainly in the UK, has begun to have an effect on our day-to-day lives. We've had kind of a shift in mindset as to how we look at technology. I think it's really key to highlight that. If we were having this conversation, doing this speech kind of this time last year, the conversation would perhaps be more based around the incremental adoption of new technologies in the next generations. Over the past year, broadcasters, service providers have had to look at the technology they're using and look at how they can use it to adapt to the unique circumstances that they've been presented with. So I think to lead into the conversation that's going to follow, it's really important for us to think about what's changed. More importantly, going forward, what do we keep in terms of technology innovation? And I really want to highlight that point that I've put as the title for this slide is ultimately the technology is the enabler for the innovation. So, we are speaking with the technology vendors that are providing these fantastic solutions, but equally it's up to the end user, it's the operators as well that are coming up with the ideas on the ground, how sports production is going to evolve. And I'm looking forward to actually hearing in more detail what some of the other panelists are going to tell us in more detail about that and how they've been doing that. So what I want to hone in is on two really major aspects of change, I think, for sports broadcasting in the past year. You can see there, broadcast infrastructure. And if we think about that, a year ago, what would we be talking about in terms of technology? Well, it would be IP deployments, I think, and, format upgrades. So the incremental move to higher resolutions. How do we integrate HDR into the workflow? That would probably all seem like very familiar conversations for all of us at a kind of an event like this. And then on the other hand, there's kind of the fan experience for those that are engaging with sports content. And that is perhaps less less of an obvious point for innovation. There's certainly new technologies that are being driven in there, but still being seen as very separate spaces, you know, in venue and at home, as two separate places that we might be looking at for innovation and technology. So if we think about, you know, what has changed in the past year and how broadcasting companies adapted their sports service, remote production, and this is, I guess, this is not just in isolation for the sports broadcasters. This is for everyone, you know, that's had to remain on air and provide continuity of their service. Is ultimately, you know, remote production has been redefined. And I want to emphasize that you know, COVID in many respects is an accelerant of existing technology changes, existing technologies that were available to the industry. It's just the adoption and their use has evolved and adapted. So when we think about remote production, you know, prior to the pandemic, I think is often very commonly used as a shorthand for the REMI, remote integration model, which is really interesting and delivers a number of benefits in terms of increasing the utilization of hardware or software. But now the objectives of remote production, or certainly in the past 11 months, shifted to actually remote production is about access. So the remote production workflows that have been innovated and created by you know, different broadcasters and service providers in the last year are not necessarily of the same nature as the remote production workflows that we were talking about pre-pandemic. And that's a really important distinction to make, I think, in terms of, again, moving to that idea of shifting the mindset of how we're viewing these technologies. On the other hand, you know, looking at the fan experience, this is where I think there's a lot of really interesting creativity. So if we think about, you know, the immediate challenge that was faced with, you know, the removal of large gatherings, you know, internationally, is that within major sporting events, there was suddenly the absence of a crowd. And in terms of covering that from a broadcast perspective, you know, there were a number of, you know, different ways to deal with that, whether that's, you know, providing more analysis, more commentary, more graphics, more replays, all of these solutions. But it's interesting as things have evolved, you know, the integration of virtual crowds, as we've all become more video literate, more commonly comfortable with using video collaboration softwares like, you know, Zoom, Teams, not just professionally, but also in our personal lives. It's become a part of our reality. And it's really interesting to see how different content providers, production companies are reflecting that on screen with virtual crowds. And second to that, it's proven that there is this opportunity, especially for the kind of the super fans, the highly engaged supporters, that we can monetize these digital and virtual experiences. And, you know, again, there's been interest in mixed reality prior to COVID, but when we've had to focus on the at-home experience, how do we level that up and make that more interactive is, again, a really interesting site for innovation. So lastly, I just want to kind of, you know, look to the future and frame this, you know, because we've got all of these fantastic technologies that we can use to achieve these different changes in the fan experience, in the broadcast infrastructure, how we deliver content. But ultimately, as an industry, you know, sports broadcasting and production, a lot of the technology change is actually going to be driven by changes in the workforce. And what I have here is, you know, a chart demonstrating the makeup over time of the global workforce by generation. And this is not isolated to just broadcast and, you know, production. This is across all industries. And what you'll note is actually we're set for some really significant change in the next few years, because from 2020, we've got 52% of the global workforce made up of digital natives. By just 2024, that's going to be 72% of the workforce made up of digital natives. And I think it's important to emphasize that there is a fundamental difference there. You know, they've learned on different tools, especially, you know, the Gen Zs that make up are going to increasingly make up a bigger portion of that digital native workforce. You know, they're able to, anyone can be a content creator. They can go live immediately, you know, via Twitch. They're innovating with TikTok, Instagram. You know, even at my point as kind of a millennial, if I wanted to create content, you know, when I was growing up, it would be, you know, you'd have to get a camera, you'd have to use software to edit. You can do this all now within your smartphone, and you can edit using the UX of your app, whether that's, you know, TikTok or whatever, to, you know, put together a piece of content and reach an audience. So what they bring to the industry is going to be increasingly exciting. And I think that's a good place to leave it, I guess, and pass back to Jake and the other members to kind of invite them in to kind of offer their thoughts in terms of future innovation.
Many thanks, Chris. Really great oversight as well, and will really help actually with the what's Bridget and Laurie, who we can welcome to the stage too. We'll be able to talk about now. Hi, Laurie. Hi. Hi, Bridget.
Hi, Jake.
Hi. Actually, before we kick off this part of the discussion, I just want to remind people that you can write your questions to all of our panelists on the comments bit, and I'll be keeping an eye on those so I can ask them as soon as they come in and incorporate it into their chat. Before we start, I'd like to get Bridget and Laurie to introduce themselves a little. So, Bridget, do you want to start and tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do, please?
Yeah, so Bridget Bremner, I'm with Sky Sports, and I'm in the role of head of production. Part of what I look after as head of production is Formula One, cricket, multi-sport, which has got quite an array of sports, of darts, of netball, of NFL. So yeah, quite a range of it, and rugby league in that as well. So it's really to look after the team and manage the team and work with the content, which is our producers and our teams to deliver, the content with our production management team. Thanks,
Bridget. And Laurie, same question to you.
Hello, I'm Laurie Beaumont. I'm the head of graphics at Move. And for those of you who don't know who Move are, we are a graphic services company that provide a multitude of graphic solutions for broadcast and events. And this ranges from the traditional on-screen graphics to virtual studios to augmented reality. We've also done some VR 360 as well in our history, which we still keep on top of. And then that's all supported with our software suite that we have developed over the last few years that has really accelerated in the last year especially, which is called Constellation. And that revolves around 4 core products. Orion, which is a graphics playout software. Then we have Aquarius, which is data management. Phoenix, which is more social media curation, and then Gemini, which is our cloud-based rendering platform as well. So these are the parts of Move that really make us, be able to offer some really good services to the industry and help people with their work and making it much more easy for them to do so.
Great. We'll find out more about the Constellation in a short while. I want to start with Bridget. Obviously, Sky had to cope with live sport stopping and then restarting it again, and there's lots of innovations around that. And Chris mentioned, virtual crowds, acceleration of remote production, lots around the fan experience. And also the presentation of shows by necessity had to adapt as well to cope with lockdown conditions and the easing of that, but also, very restricted ways of presenting content that was very different prior to the pandemic. So do you want to talk a little bit, Bridget, about, what Sky did, Sky Sports, to, adapt and cope with the return of live sport?
Yeah. So firstly, I think many people will remember a year ago, March. So on the 12th of March, actually a year ago, Sky as a project prior to, the pandemic, I think there were already signs of COVID in the UK, but Sky had then decided to do a test day working from home for the full business in the UK. And that day very soon became a permanent situation. So I remember on that day, it was a Thursday actually, a lot of sport started, was being called off as a result of COVID. So it started, with Premier League. We started by the Friday the 13th, we'd started with F1, the Australian Grand Prix was called off, and it literally was a snowball and a domino effect. So we ended up, I think, pretty much losing all of our live content, within the space of 2 to 3 days. And by the Monday, I think everything was gone, apart from we were still planning to do some rugby games that week and some boxing, but I think those were probably the last ones. And very soon, it didn't take very long for, obviously, after government announcements and that, for things to tumble as well. Mm-hmm. I think the big challenge was, we'd basically done the test to work remotely. The first thing is engaging the teams, making sure people can communicate. The things Chris mentioned, it's actually really important. It's an innate that obviously we all now a lot more familiar with. I didn't know what Teams was, a year ago. No expert on it, but I think we're a lot more au fait with it right now. We then spent the first sort of, I think, the initial phase looking at what can we actually offer our customers as live content and what can we give. And in the absence of live content, and it wasn't just the UK, but it was anywhere in the world, because I think broadcasters all over were calling up, talking to each other, saying, do you have any live content? What do you have? Tiddlywinks would have been popular if it was live, back then. So I think the key was there was no live content. And so the question of what could we offer? And our technical teams then were working on technology, which is sort of in the cloud, and they were looking at the vMix solution. It was probably our initial idea, but very quickly became a reality. And one of our first broadcasts working in the remote world was then done with cricket in May. We then did, the cricket, the World Cup, and had a sort of panel sort of like this, and looking at actually the Cricket World Cup of the year prior. So that suddenly just, I think, thrusted our teams into, a completely different way of working, which was very challenging. Not necessary. I suppose the tech teams would say that there were probably a lot of things in the back room around how things were working that was probably a little bit sort of put together. It wasn't quite robust, but they worked through that to refine that process and make that platform, I think, more usable and accessible to the team. What I think we suddenly saw a surge from our content team saying, oh, that works. And they saw how, the great response and the interaction with the customers, as well. And everybody was thinking about ideas of how they can actually create content out of what we've got, how can we present that? So I think within literally a space of a couple of weeks, we needed to get people trained, on a system that we were still developing and was in the process, and get more people across it, and try and sort of keep up with the demand, literally, of the content that was, and the ideas, the creative ideas that were coming through. So I think we spent quite a lot of the time sort of through the first lockdown getting our teams trained up, and that was from our production managers, our technical supervisors, our producers, our APs, and the talent, because suddenly they had to be their own cameraman, own sound, and they needed to do it all in this way at home. So quite a major, challenge for them. I think we were very quickly facing June and the imminent announcement, obviously, of sport returning. And we know that football was the first, Premier League were the first to announce their return. So I think it was the 19th of June was the date we were aiming for. So I think we had about 5 weeks to sort of look at how do we actually bring sport back. And one of the things we immediately did was there was a return to sport plan that was put in place, and looking at sort of all sorts of details. But I think the fundamental consideration was keeping our people safe. So that was the reason everybody was working from home. Obviously, we're not able to go anywhere. And how do we keep our people safe? And with sport returning, how do we continue to do that? We then actually sort of implemented at Sky return to sport meetings, where for the first time, even though everybody in production is used to production meetings, and where all parties come together and can discuss, sort of their plans and goals and aspiration and objectives and what some solutions may be. I think the key thing of the return to sport, we brought together our content team, our production team, our technical team, our Sky Production Services, who provide all our crews, our bookings, our booking system, our resource and planning team, which we use a tool called Planet. We also brought into those return to sports, actually, our suppliers, our OB companies. If we were using external graphics, we brought those companies into that discussion and started talking about how can we produce this content live, working remotely. We obviously had some experience with our Formula One, which was already running for remote in its third year, and EFL football was also pretty much had run remote for just under a year, because they'd started the year before, in I think October the year before, but we'd been doing tests for it. So we had some things that actually, and we've had other events over a number of years that we have actually trialed various forms of remote production. And I think the big thing was the collaboration of those return to sport meetings were quite vital in terms of getting our teams to work differently, because that was the key thing. And the technologies of all the various technologies available was as Chris actually mentioned, technology became the enabler for us to return sport. So I think that was, quite a challenge. It's something we've sort of bedded down, and I suppose we're looking at how that goes forward.
That's a brilliantly thorough response there, Bridget. I was going to ask lots of questions. You kind of covered most of them there, and I'm conscious that I've only got 10 minutes left, amazingly, already. So I want to go to Laurie next, and then we can sort of talk a bit more broadly about the future as well, and some of the things that you've implemented during lockdown, whether there's a kind of future for a lot of that way of working. But Laurie, Constellation, you said this product set that you've created has been accelerated during COVID to, kind of why? What does it enable you to do that you couldn't do before?
Well, it's we had the foundations of this product set before COVID hit, and it was all working really well. We had rolled it out to a number of different clients, including BT Sport being the primary user of all 4 pillars, and then people like Wimbledon, WBS using maybe just the cloud rendering part of it as an example. But what COVID required us to do is kind of rethink the workflows behind it all. Because very quickly, as Bridget and Chris have mentioned previously, everyone had to work from home almost instantaneously. So, and then around that, obviously programming changed. So, for example, BT, who were doing a lot of live-based programming, were doing a lot of archive programming, as Bridget's mentioned on the Sky side as well. So the requirements changed pretty quickly overnight. So we were still doing live broadcasts using our Orion softwares to kind of ingest data and play out graphics and data fed graphics, but we were finding that we were doing more and more renders. And when you work in a facility, obviously there's certain rules where you have to work behind certain DMZs to make sure that nothing bad from the outside world can come in, but that all has to be really, really rethought under these circumstances. And we're really fortunate to work with some really forward-thinking organizations like BT and facilities partners like Timeline and Telegenic, who enable us in that partnership to really push our products even further forward. And over this period, we've allowed producers and program editors to log on and author their own graphics via our Gemini software from home in the middle of the night without the need of even contacting us to get involved. And then within that, the second step was to automate a load of responses based upon third-party data streams that we were receiving from people like Stats Perform and Opta, where we were just doing automatic renders based upon what we were seeing from the Football League or the Premier League or the Bundesliga or wherever, Champions League, Europa League as well, that would just cut out so many parts of the chain that allows the producers and editors to make their content a lot quicker. So identifying these pinch points, these are already things on our roadmaps, but it's just identifying the workflow changes required to make them happen under these circumstances. And we're blessed with a tremendous amount of support from not only our technical partners but our facilities partners and our clients as well that allow this to happen, really buy into everything.
Yeah, I can see then the reason why you needed to kind of accelerate that. It sounds like with some of those changes, and especially kind of putting the power back to the client, that they're going to be really positive changes for the future as well. And the fact that they've been accelerated is kind of going to benefit everyone.
Yeah, exactly. And, if people can, if make more the process more efficient, then it cuts down time. And, a lot of edits in TV are quick turnaround things, and you need to get them out as quick as possible. So, replacing any human element and have an automated process really can help with that. Just going back into other parts of the remote working side, we do a lot of work on virtual studios and augmented reality as well, and being able to support all of those projects remotely as well with a design team is also a challenge, just with connectivity and size of files. But it's something that over the last 12 months has become quite easy and quite normal now, and I think it will be something that we see moving forward a lot more. BT had done remote productions with their National League football for a year or so prior to the pandemic hitting. So there are a lot of things in place that allowed us to mobilize quite quickly when we were all told to work from home and make television from home again. And, we did our first remote broadcast within 24 hours of being sent home. And, that was an amazing effort from all involved to make that happen. And it all went well. I think the key thing when working remotely, when you've got two graphics operators in two different houses in two different parts of the country, let's say, or city, or wherever they're based, the key thing is communication and being able to see what you need to see. You know, you are limited in what you are able to see and hear in comparison to what you would see in a live PCR, because of the amount of screens available and the amount of talkback panels available. But making it as efficient and as seamless as possible is the important thing to kind of make the audience at home not realize that it is a remote production.
Thanks, Laurie. And we've got quite a few questions in already, actually, and I'm conscious of time. So I'm going to leave my questions there and ask some of these audience ones. One of them, you mentioned, Laurie, automation, and Bridget, I'd be interested to get your take on this. The question says, what do you think of the impact of the kind of AI-driven tracking cameras on sport production, where you literally would not even need a camera operator? You just got these cameras sort of tracking the ball or tracking the players. So you're kind of completely automating that production process. Is there a desire to go down that route at all at Sky for any of the sports, or bringing in new sports rights, maybe some of the lower tier sports, and giving that a try? Or do you think that there always needs to be some sort of operators there on site to manage the cameras and everything else that's required on site?
Jake, I think that for Sky, certainly, and Sky Sports, as we return to sport, the key consideration of everything, every aspect we've done, whether that is on site, on an outside broadcast, or whether that has been in a studio, in a gallery at Sky, or an edit, whatever the situation, has been about keeping our people safe through COVID. So I think the key thing has been numbers. We've had to obviously reduce numbers on site, reduce the amount of traveling for people, and what that then feeds into is all the technical consideration that we've then looked at and discussed within our return to sports with the technical teams and the content teams. There's aspirations, I think, to use more automated systems, to use tracking, and use the technology that's out there. But can we actually do it, one, safely? Can we do it through the connectivity that we've got? What do we have to prioritize? So, and it's always balanced with people's safety, because it comes back to numbers of people that we're then operating. And we're not out of that yet. We're still, I think, if we were in a post-COVID, I think, yes, as broadcasters, everybody would want to, kind of get onto that technology as quickly as you possibly can, look at how it can apply and how it can improve your content. But I think we're still very much, in the middle of COVID. Hopefully there's some light now at the end of the tunnel, but it's still a consideration. Unfortunately, what is the capacity, and it's around connectivity, and what is the sort of safety elements? Will it need another body, or does it improve it, or does it create a problem elsewhere? And because you're reducing numbers of engineers or TSs in a gallery, or suddenly a TS has more responsibility than, has more responsibility to what a vision guarantee would have had in an OB. And those are very, very different. So it's looking at actually it holistically rather than just individually.
Yeah, and Laurie, would an automation of the production side from the kind of camera point of view, and also, I guess, the data it's capturing can still be the same? Would it impact much on kind of the graphics, the on-screen analysis, and the kind of stuff that you work on?
Yeah, it can do. We're seeing a lot kind of automation and player tracking from a sense of statistical point of view these days, which is being distributed by third-party data providers such as StatsPerform, and it's all about ingesting that data and kind of interpreting it the best way possible. Because the data set with something like that, in terms of player tracking, I know it's slightly different with an AI camera person in that sense, but this is how we would apply in our case. If you are doing player-based tracking and you're getting that data, it's using the AI from those data feeds to really drill down into the data set, because it's so vast and deep, to really pull out what you're looking for. I think AI in that respect can get you so far. I think with sport being such an emotional thing for people in general, with the affinities they have to certain clubs and all of that, I think it's important to have that human element to really understand this is the thing that people really want to know about now. But you do need the AI, I think, in certain respects to help you get there, just because otherwise you'll be sitting there for ages going through the data, and you may miss the moment to share the information.
Yeah. And Chris, in terms of the kind of analysis that you've been doing, have you seen much of a kind of move towards these automated production systems in any part of the workflow?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. As it was highlighted, by both Bridget and Laurie, is, efficiency is really, really key here at this in terms of adapting the workflows. So automation and I should say on the camera front, actually, we track the PTZ camera market as well as the system camera market. So of course, system cameras are being kind of the stalwart of, high-end sports. PTZs obviously will never replace the abilities of what, a Steadicam operator can do. And you simply cannot, with a remote camera, do what some human, kind of camera operators can do that have got that experience. But going to the safety point, firstly, where you can't have as many people on site, PTZs have been a solution that's been very popular in the last year. And then secondly, integration for IP workflows, and again, to virtual studios as well, handing off 3D data and spatial. Again, it's easier to do at a lower price point with PTZ cameras. So yeah, absolutely. And there are a number of different reasons beyond just sport why PTZs have, skyrocketed in terms of their demand in the last year, and they've already been, on the increase. But it's not just broadcast and isolation, of course. We look at all the other areas where the professional PTZ cameras and those robotic cameras are being, hugely useful, even medical and healthcare. So, yeah, I think there's a couple of caveats around that, but certainly it is more relevant as well, even in high-end sports.
Good stuff. I know we're very pushed for time, but there is a question specifically for Laurie here, and it's quite a niche graphics question, but I want to ask it before we finish. Says, do you consider the trend to HTML graphics and on-device graphic rendering from metadata will increase in the future?
Yeah, I think it will, because there's a few parts to it. I think, first of all, what HTML5 graphics allow you to do is create a kind of the ability to have a bespoke experience for the viewer that they can customize themselves, whether through something like object-based broadcasting, let's say. So, altering the size of graphics, all of that sort of stuff, showing only certain types of graphics that they may want to see is all possible. And that's a very powerful thing, not only from a customization, but sponsorship, all of these sorts of things that can be monetized as well. There's a lot of avenues there. I think the second part of it as well, HTML5, with everything being rendered on devices or on the cloud, it allows for integration with things like vMix a lot easier from different locations. And there's also a cost point as well, which is favorable. You're not having to buy vast amounts of hardware to render these things if they're being done in the cloud on virtual machines. So there are benefits. For me, at the moment, it's a toss up, because there's some very powerful HTML5 based systems out there. But then the more kind of established systems that we be able to add a few layers of sophistication in what you're able to create from a graphics point of view, in terms of complexity and all of those sorts of things around it. So I do think there's very much a market for it, and I think it'll only get stronger over time as the model kind of changes. And you're seeing some of the big graphics hitters around the world kind of having solutions in that avenue as well to their kind of more traditional hardware-based systems.
Brilliant. Well, like I say, I can't believe how quick that went. It's been a pleasure to hear your insights, everyone. Thank you very much, Bridget, Laurie, and Chris. And I hope you enjoyed that. There's some really interesting discussion points there. We've got to stop. I've been told I need to wrap up now. So thanks very much. Take care, everyone, and enjoy the rest of the day for everyone else that's watching. Take care. See you soon.
Thanks, Jake.
Thank you, Jake.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.